This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
Hey, this is Erin with Cornell Studio Supply, located in the gem city of Dayton, Ohio. As a proud sponsor of this episode and the Brickyard Network, we are happy to help you with all your pottery and ceramic sculpture needs by providing the best customer service and world-class workshops. Visit CornellStudioSupply.com for 20% off the largest ceramic book selection of all time. At Cornell Studio Supply, we are owned and operated for potters, by potters.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online source for research and inspiration, featuring photos of thousands of objects made by over 800 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit www.rosenfieldcollection.com. Hello, my name is Kathy King, and welcome to the For Flux Sake podcast. I'm coming to you from the Harvard Ceramics program in our fair city, Allston, Massachusetts. I'm here with Rose and Matt Katz of the world-famous Ceramic Materials Workshop, and they are ready to answer your burning questions about clay and glaze. Well, hello, Matt and Rose.
Hey, Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi. You know what? I've got something on my mind.
Oh, tell us.
I miss Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, some of you out there may not know what that is, and you're probably too young to even know what an encyclopedia set is.
Sit down, children, and let us tell you about a time before Wikipedia.
I remember there used to be a thing, like when I was a little girl, and every week when we went to the supermarket, my mom would buy one more of the set of encyclopedias. And so, like, so 1 week it'd be like, ooh, we're saving up to get P, or P through R or something. And the thing about it, why I bring this up, is that you truly believed what was written in those books as like a fact or something. You believed that somebody had checked the facts that went, it's in print. It must be real.
It must be real.
Right. And I'm just coming across, again, some folks out there talking about clay facts that I wish like we had a ceramic Encyclopedia Britannica.
Well, I was a World Book family, so I will fight you, Kathy.
Oh my good. Listen, I'm a peaceful kind of gal. Mm-hmm.
Years ago, Simon Levin did try to make a Wikipedia for ceramics, and Derek from Glazy did have a sort of contribution thing. It's hard to be the arbiter of facts. That part is definitely true. Because, we talk about this all the time with our research. Like, we just put out our research and we'll tell you what we're working from. But saying, trying to justify someone else's facts becomes very, very difficult. But it definitely is an item of faith.
Yeah. For instance, somebody mentioned the other day about how we were out of CMC, right? So it was, well, just use V-gum. And I know that the two of them are not the same, though I'm not smart enough to tell you why, which is why I hang out with you two, or three of you, actually. I'll put Ben in the mix here.
Ben's there too. Well, can I? You're hitting something right there. You're getting me in the feels, Kathy. Can I tell you my story of personal trauma?
Sure, we got all day, Matt. All day.
Probably this is therapy, everybody. Sit back. Let's see Matt's vulnerable side.
I get my tea here.
So when I was an undergraduate student at Alfred, It was the end of my first semester in ceramics. And you're not allowed to do ceramics. Back then, you weren't allowed to do ceramics your first year. So you had to wait until your second year to get into ceramics. So at the end of my semester, and I want to bring home some clay. And in Alfred, you have to make your own clay. Like you could buy it, but only fancy rich people bought their own clay. So you make your own clay. So I'm making clay in the room. We call it the grinding room, which was where you make your own clay. And I was following the recipe. They have a wall. They had all these. Everybody who's been to Alfred will know they had all these pieces of poster board with recipes written on them. And you go and pick the recipe you do. And I was doing the porcelain recipe, and I'm going through the recipe. And, it's like 2 days before the school closes for Christmas. And I'm the last person in the grinding room. And the recipe calls for V-gum. And I go to the bin that had V-gum in it, and it was empty. There was no V-gum at the inn. And I went to the person at the time who ran the grinding room, who was a real type. They threw their weight around like they knew everything. And I said, hey, person X, we're out of V-gum. Can you get some more? Like, oh, that's all the way back in the storage room. I don't want to get it. Go get some CMC. That's the same thing. So me being cute little Matt, I was still giant Matt back then, but it was still like, oh, okay, mister, sure, whatever you say. And I got it, and I put, I don't know, it was probably 3% CMC into my porcelain. And when I packaged it all up and I brought it home for Christmas to have these 300 pounds of clay that I could use on my little wheel at home. Did you
pug mill it too?
No, we didn't have. This was before we had pug mills. We weren't allowed to have pug mills back then.
Oh my goodness, it's hardcore.
And I got it home, and by the time I got it home, I had 300 pounds of solid rock because CMC is like putting glue into your clay body. It is not a substitute for V-gum. And this guy proclaiming his expertise and throwing his weight around is exactly what you're talking about, Kathy, of people doing the best that they can and with resources. And it's hard. I mean, we hear it all the time of, somebody saying, oh, I'm out of this material. What material can I use? And it depends on what you're trying to substitute. If you're in a glaze and you've got, the recipe calls for EPK and you're in Australia and all they have is Echolate, is that going to be okay? Yeah, it'll probably be okay. But if you're in a clay body and it calls for ball clay and you don't have your ball clay and you just have another one and somebody substitutes it, that very well may not be okay. They have got different working properties. They are different types of materials that serve a different purpose.
And different chemistry too.
Different chemistries. It all can definitely be a challenge. So, we really encourage you to take some time and learn about your materials and really know what it is and take what you're hearing out there with a grain of salt, because the free information on the internet's worth about what you're paying for it, he says, as he puts out free advice on the internet. But that's a podcast.
Well, true. True. But we're all doing our best just to find our way. So, all right, shall we spread some of that knowledge into the ether?
Everybody certainly looks skeptically at their phone.
Okay, let's get to some questions. So our first question is coming from Gigi, who's in London. How fabulous. And Gigi wrote in and said, I'd love to hear you discuss rare earth metals in glazes. Finding info on their effects is tough. Even the suppliers don't seem to have much. Is it worth diving in and buying all of them to experiment, or are some likely to be duds?
Well, Gigi,
name them. Name all the rare earth metals.
Oh,
quick.
I can name them.
Do it.
But first you have to, Gigi, I hope you have a lot of money, because these are expensive. So you start looking them up. You're like, oh yeah, $20 a pound. That's not too much. And then you realize how much a glaze will take for this. Ooh, you're getting into an expensive habit.
Well, Yeah, I may have bought some recently, Rose, and
Oh, where?
I think your cost estimates may be a little off, and she hasn't seen the credit card bill yet. I bought 100 grams, and I'm sorry, I forget. They are really hard to find. The recommendation came from a friend, and I'm actually kicking myself. I was looking for the card as the question was being asked, and but it's just a guy who does crystalline glazes. He sells them on eBay, but I bought 100 grams of each of these, and it cost us about $300.
Oh my.
100 grams each.
This is why I need to start doing POs for you. You know, you have to you can't just get away with this, man. Yeah, I'm gonna take away that credit card.
But are you talking about like some of the weirder ones? I mean, because some are it's
Some are weird, some of them aren't.
Yeah.
So let's name. So there's Praesidinium, which is like a green, it's a
is that
purpley.
how you say that?
Yeah.
There's
Am I
wow.
pronouncing it wrong?
I don't know. I've always said Presidium,
Praesidinium.
but I don't know why. It's a yellow, a mason stain.
Yeah.
It's a really
Yeah.
pretty yellow. Go ahead.
Mhm.
Praesidinium of itself is green generally.
Yeah.
Really?
So neodymium, which is this one's a pretty cool one. This one changes color depending on if you're
matrix.
fluorescent light or incandescent light. So it's like a blue. It can be a lavender color in incandescent. There's erbium, which is pink. There's holmium. Did I say that one right? Holmium, which is yellow. There's uranium, which is orange.
The
And
original rare earth is
Yes.
uranium.
Mm-hmm. And I always cerium. Is it cerium or cerium?
Cerium. Yeah, either one.
So which is a tan. It's not all that exciting. So, I
Okay.
don't
How
My
do you
pho- my-
know.
what?
The voice assistant on my phone went off as we said that. I
Oh,
thought
really?
We were addressing her.
See, now you've just ordered like 10 pounds
Oh yeah,
of it.
I
from
ordered
somewhere.
10 pounds of it. Thanks.
Quick, producer Ben, bleep it. Everyone's gonna get really pissed.
How do you pronounce the one that's YB? It's spelled YTTERBIUM.
Yttrium. Oh, ytterbium. Oh my gosh,
Whoa.
Kathy's pulled up a periodic table. Everybody,
Oh, good job.
I have one. I do own one.
ytterbium.
Okay.
I believe it's ytterbium, but I don't refer to it all that much. You know, I say I know
Okay.
chemistry. I only know the chemistry I deal with. Don't ask me all that other stuff.
Okay. Well, which ones should Gigi shoot for? I mean, if not all of them, that
Well, I mean, I would stay away from uranium, please.
Yes. Well, okay. This is a controversial topic in our family because, you know, a couple times a year, somebody will email us and, you know, they'll usually have a studio they're looking to empty out. And they'll be like, do you guys want any of this stuff? And inevitably, there's some uranium oxide in there.
sure.
No, that is
Rose
always my
says
answer.
no. She won't let me have any fun, you guys. It's not cool.
No.
She
You have
insists she doesn't want the
children.
cat to have another tail. They're old enough now.
Well, the ones that are probably a little more common are the erbium, the neodymium, and the praesidinium. Those three are, you know, unique in color, but they're not cheap, unfortunately.
No.
They're a rare earth for a reason.
Yeah. I don't know the exact origin of where they were discovered, but our friend David Peer sort of wrote the first article about it that sort of made these a known thing. And that was about 20 years ago where he wrote
Yeah.
that. You can
That was
find
when I was
weird.
in school.
Yeah. They are really cool. They look amazing. They're definitely different shades of color. Like we can make blue
Yeah.
and green and pink. But they're interesting shades. But yeah, they are crazy expensive. You know, like I said, it was 100 grams each. I bought praesidinium, neodymium, erbium, and I think holmium, and it was over
cerium?
$300.
Did you
no,
get the
no, the
cerium too?
actually the cerium. I'll tell you that in a second. Other purchases. You guys have in trouble. You guys
Oh
help me.
man, how much money did you spend now?
Well, the cat's not going to get to go to college anymore. I spent the cat's college fund.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, like it was like $100 for 100 grams. So like $1 a gram. So as Rose is saying, you want to make a big batch of this, it is going to cost you. And I would say they are lovely.
They are. They're really pretty.
Yeah. Are they worth the cost? That's between you and your wallet. I really can't say. I did try something new. One of our longtime students, Sarah Nikotopoulos, had told me that she'd been getting some of the cerium and from a lapidary supply store. And I mentioned before that we use lapidary supply
grinding?
For grinding as a grinding and polishing medium. So we talked that we use lapidary supply for silicon carbide. So the silicon carbide you might use for a lava glaze or a fake reduction, that's just grinding and polishing medium, and they sell it by mesh size. So we buy ours from lapidary supply.
And you get like 5 different mesh sizes too.
Oh, no, we got 8.
8?
We got 8 from them last time. But they had cerium and tin as polishing oxides, and I bought both of them. I haven't tried them yet, but they were a lot cheaper. Unfortunately, the cerium is not that exciting. The color, it does kind of just make a tannish, whitish color, but I was spending Rose's money, so.
No,
inheritance.
You're spending your bonus, unfortunately.
Wait, you pay me?
No, I don't, but it's, it's in theory.
I'm in so much trouble. But yeah, that is the list. They are fun. Oh, I guess, well, we should have said for the uranium, just so you know, it definitely is radioactive.
Yes.
It's not dangerous radioactivity. I mean, radioactivity is a big conversation, but the uranium does make wonderful colors, and there's the whole Fiestaware story about that, but it
Really
definitely
nice
is
orange.
radioactive. Really nice orange.
Yeah. I wonder where you can buy uranium. Am I just getting on a list right now? Did I
Matt
just get
may
on a
have
list
bought it
somewhere?
already if his series still on.
Hey, Rose, can you tell me if you ever bring a Geiger counter to the house? I just need a day heads
I
up.
saw one for sale recently, and it was a little handheld one. I was totally thinking of getting it, but now I don't.
I really would discourage you from doing that, and let me know if you're going to take anything like that to the workshop. Right. The uranium one, we were at Fiestaware, the big dinnerware company, and their oranges used to be a uranium orange, and their CEO was telling us a story about how a kid brought a uranium orange Fiestaware bowl in and got an entire high school shut down.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Because the chemistry teacher used a Geiger counter to see if it was radioactive, and it was, and the safety systems in the school freaked out.
Wow. Wah. So poor Gigi, give her one that you think would be worth trying.
Oh, I mean, that's sort of color preference as to what you would really like.
Okay.
As Rose said, the neodymium's fun because it changes color in between incandescent light and fluorescent light. So
that I'm voting for that one.
Yeah. Yeah. That one's fun. It's a blue color generally, but
blue, and then it turns like a purpley in different light. But I mean, we see the praseodymium a lot in the yellow. I mean, that one seems more common out of all of them.
And as you said, Kathy, there are stains that use them, and it's cheaper for the stain companies to do it, and they're using fractions. But yeah, they do use them in some of the stains, to be sure.
Well, let us move on to our next question, which comes from Sven in Germany. And Sven wants to know about the coefficient of thermal expansion.
Hello, Matt and Rose. This is Sven from Germany, and I have a question. When I look at the data sheets of the clay masses or enter the chemical analysis in a glazing program like Glazy or something else, I get a concrete number that describes the expansion rate of the mass. The same applies to glazes. I noticed that the values for my clays are always smaller than the values for my glazes. But I know that there are glazes that sit well on my clay without grazing. Can I conclude from this that clay and glaze do not have to have exactly the same numbers to work well together? And if so, can I conclude from this that there is some kind of theoretical maximum something like a max delta difference between the two values, from which I can determine whether my glaze and clay combination will graze or not. I know this sounds very nerdy, but I'm afraid I'm falling deep down the rabbit hole of glaze chemistry since I listened to your podcast. Thanks, greetings from Germany, by Sven.
Yay, Sven!
I think Sven is one of our regular callers, and I think I think we have to put Sven in just for the accent. Sven, I need you to read me bedtime stories.
Exactly, he needs to read my audiobook. Yeah.
Oh, it reminds me. My grandmother was German, and so it's just not that Sven sounds like my grandmother, but I do have a soft spot for those German accents. The worst part isn't that Sven sounds like my grandmother. It's that my grandmother sounded like Sven. No, but it is a fantastic question, and it is a little nerdery. So put on your nerd hats, everybody. We gotta go deep. The first thing is what is Sven talking about? He's talking about CTE, or some people will refer to it as COE, which is coefficient of expansion or coefficient of thermal expansion, which is how much materials expand and contract when you heat and cool them. This is a reality of all materials. Every single material in the world has thermal expansion or thermal contraction. Okay, so you heat it up and it expands, you cool it and it contracts. That's why we have seams in concrete, because in the summer the concrete expands and it needs room to go, and then in the winter it cools back down. And it's reversible, and that's an important detail. Thermal expansion is not shrinkage. Shrinkage is not reversible. Thermal expansion is reversible, so it goes up and it goes back. The next thing we'll say is a personal peccadillo. I actually don't like the term thermal expansion, especially when it refers to ceramics. I prefer to talk about thermal contraction, because the numbers that Sven is talking about get really confusing when you talk about expansion. So if you have a high number with thermal expansion, let's just say you've got a 7 and a 5. A 7 expands and contracts more than a 5. Okay, so there's going to be more contraction with the bigger number. And so that's really important, because when you're buying clay bodies especially, a lot of times the clay manufacturer will give you the thermal expansion, which is how much that clay body is going to expand when you heat it. Why do we care? Because ceramics are not particularly good at thermal expansion. And what I'm talking about is reheating. This is why you can't really put pots in the oven for baking, because they expand really quickly because the oven is hot, and that creates stress and the work fails. So it's this expansion contraction thing. So we have this expansion contraction value. And the bigger catch is that clay bodies are going to have an expansion of X, and glazes are going to have a contraction of Y. Okay. If the difference between the contraction of the glaze and the clay body are the same, you have no problems, which is sort of what that was part of what Sven was asking. Theoretically, a glaze that is not crazed, the clay body and the glaze have relatively the same thermal contraction. They are expanding and contracting at the same rate. If the glaze has a higher contraction rate than the clay body, the glaze will crack because it creates stress in the clays. And so to relieve the stress, the glaze cracks. That's what crazing is. Crazing is glazes crazing is cracking to relieve the stress of differences in thermal expansion. We also have the opposite end. If the clay body has a higher contraction than the glaze, that's when we get shivering or dunting, which is literally the clay body crazing to relieve the stress, right? It's that same, you get stress and you get a crack. So we're always trying to find these two materials have the same thing. But unfortunately, Sven brought up the thing that I really have to pick at, which is from a clay perspective. It is very normal for clays to have a thermal expansion number, and that definitely should be. You want that number. That number, though, has to be tested in a machine called a dilatometer. And a dilatometer is a piece of equipment whose sole job is to measure thermal expansion.
We have one of those.
We have two of them.
Oh, we do have two of them. I forgot about the second one.
We have a very old one that we got years ago, and then it didn't work as well, so we got a new one. But you have to use this dilatometer to measure thermal expansion. Now, what Sven was saying is that on most of the glaze calculators, will have a number that is generated and will show you thermal expansion numbers. And it's on Glazy, it's on Digital Fire, it's on Hyper Glaze, it's everywhere. But if you guys go to our website and download our glaze calculator for free, it's right there for you to take, you will note that we do not have a thermal expansion calculator. And that is because the numbers that those glaze calculators are giving you are fiction. They are purely and completely made up, and they are not relevant, and they are not representative of actual thermal expansion. Because what those calculators are doing is they're saying, oh, okay, well, silica's got a thermal expansion of X, and I've got this much silica, and sodium's got a thermal expansion of Y, and I've got this much sodium, and it takes all of them and averages them together. Yeah, that's not how chemical reactions work, because you're not dealing with sodium and silica and all of that after you fire it. It is now glass, and glass is going to have its own completely different behavior. And so those numbers are made up. You have to test it. And we would never test glazes in a dilatometer because it's impossible. The coatings are too thick. They would probably melt. It's not representative of them. And so everyone doing that, I appreciate that they're trying to create information, but it's bad information. It is completely made up. And I will say, when Derek on Glazy went to implement that, I begged him not to do that because I understand it gives people value to have numbers. And I am metric central. Y'all are probably shutting this show off because Matt talks too many numbers. But fake numbers are no good. Okay, I would rather have you have no information than fake numbers, and those numbers are not real. Now, you can test thermal expansion. You can see in the real world. Stull's map allows us to see how thermal expansion changes with chemistry and all of this type of thing. You absolutely can work with thermal expansion, but boy, I would not trust those calculated numbers. They are a fantasy, but it is good to know what your clay body is doing and how it's going to react to a lot of different variables. So at the end of the day, yes, you want to know the thermal expansion. Yes, you want two numbers that are close together. Oh, that was one other factor. Sven was asking of the differences. There is, my mentor, Dr. Carty, did have one graduate student, Jen Benson, who did her thesis on this. And she did measure thermal expansion of glazes in a dilatometer. And what is interesting is that she basically found that if you have a difference of 1 plus or minus 0.5, I guess I should say, between your glaze and your clay body, it will be stable and won't craze. But if you go outside of a difference of 0.5 plus or minus, so a total of 1, then you're more likely to get failure. But that's the actual metrics of it. But it's a great question. Rose, Kathy, what questions do you want to ask me about thermal expansion as you sit there with dead-eyed stares? Because I'd love to know.
I'm trying to figure out how we can do the glazes in the dilatometer. That's what I'm trying to figure out. But then that's like a whole other job to do full time because we run so many glazes through the
oh my
shop
goodness,
every
you have
day.
enough jobs, enough to do, enough on your plate.
You guys want to know, some people think, oh, it must be so exciting to live with Rose and Matt and hear all the glaze talk. So Rose, the problem is, how are you going to extract a thin enough film of glass that's representative of the volume of a glaze application versus the mass that you have to melt, because we know that the chemical performance will change with thickness. So it's automatically not representative when it's not a thin film. And then on top of it, you're going to try to cut that glass and not get it to shatter? Good luck. And then third in a dilatometer, you have to heat stuff up and it's going to melt, which is going to ruin the dilatometer. I know now even producer Ben is like, oh my God,
my head hurts.
This is why I don't want to spend quality time with Matt, because he talks like this.
I just want to think about ponies or something. Come on now, people. All right. I think we all need to put our brains on ice after this episode. So
coming up on the next episode of For Flux Sake, Kathy King questions her life choices.
Oh, every episode, Matt, every. All right, y'all. Until I see you next time. Bye, Matt and Rose.
Bye, Kathy.
Bye, Kathy.
Well, folks, that's it for this week's episode of For Flux Sake. I'd like to thank the listeners who submitted questions this week, and if you want your question answered on the show, shoot us an email at ForFluxSakePodcast@gmail.com. So join us next time, and when in your studio, remember what Rose always says.
Always remember to test, test, test. This is a test of the emergency glaze system. Beep.